The Pen Friend, written and read by Christopher Halton. As a child, I had a pen friend in Cornwall with whom I corresponded regularly. Her name was Joanna Simpkins, the daughter of the Reverend Dr. J.S. Simpkins. We had never met. She was introduced to me by a school chum who was writing to a friend of hers. Unfortunately, as children, and indeed adults often do, we fell out over a trivial difference of opinion. We lost contact when her father took up a new post in another parish, and I heard nothing more of her. This was before the Great War. From 1914, I spent 6 years in the service of His Majesty's Armed Forces until 1920, when I was demobilized with the rank of captain. That year, I decided to travel down by train to Penzance for a holiday, and perchance to reacquaint myself with Joanna at the family's last known address in the tiny hamlet of Pulverin. The village lay on a low granite rise north of Penzance, between Madron Moor and the old valley track to the sea. Research suggested that the area had once been rich in tin mining, though sheep farming was now the principal industry. I considered writing in advance, but so much time had passed that there was every possibility she had moved on with her family, or, more realistically, married and become the proud mother of her own brood. In any case, I was principally on holiday and wished to see the places she had recalled from her youth, ancient, austere, and pictorially beautiful. Staying at a small boarding hotel in Penzance, I planned my journey accordingly and hired a small car to take me first to Pulverin, some 5 to 10 miles distant. After a few days in the town, I set out in a coughing, spluttering Ford Model T sedan, which appeared exhausted as it laboured over the hills and valleys along a bumpy stone trackway to the parish. After a slow and circuitous journey, I arrived to find that Pulverin was little more than a cluster of stone-walled thatched cottages and a 10th century church named St. Wilfrid's. The village rested on a hill and commanded imposing views of the surrounding valley, where stone-walled fields lay bare of trees and thick with sheep. To describe the area as bleak was doing it justice, though in the valley below a small river ran among clusters of trees and shrubs. The few local people I encountered seemed suspicious of travellers like me, and reluctant to give directions to the Pulverin vicarage. Despite their misgivings, an old woman standing outside her cottage eventually paused at her gate without a word, and gestured down the valley. Following her direction, I soon saw the imposing gates of Pulverin Manse, a 5-bedroom medieval stone and tile house, lying below the village and shrouded by trees and high boundary walls. I stopped in the carriage drive and approached the front entrance, which featured somewhat crude portico columns framing a large, heavy, black-painted door. A small brass plaque confirmed it was the vicarage. I rapped upon the knocker. After a moment, accompanied by the sound of shuffling feet, the door opened, and an elderly woman who regarded me with evident suspicion identified herself as the housekeeper. Handing her my card, which she scrutinized closely, I asked to speak to the Reverend in residence. She told me to wait, closed the door, and returned a few minutes later to admit me. I was led along a wide passageway and out into a rear-walled garden, an oasis of carefully tended shrubs and flowers, where a middle-aged man in a white jacket and straw boater was kneeling at a flower border. The housekeeper said, "This is the gentleman, sir, who wishes to speak with you," and walked away. The man rose, brushed down his trousers after removing his gloves, and smiled as he shook my hand. "Pleasure to meet you, my dear chap. We don't receive many visitors, so I apologize if my housekeeper, Mrs. Polkinghorne, seemed a little offhand. I am the Reverend James Wycliffe. How may I help you, Mr. Douglas?" I explained my connection to the Simpkins family, and his expression grew pensive as he led me inside to the lounge, where Mrs. Polkinghorne was preparing tea. Inviting me to sit in the rather cluttered Victorian-era room, he said, "Well, Mr. Douglas, "Please call me Jack," I said. "Very well, old bean. Jack. The Simpkins were my predecessors here and left the parish in 1916 after the loss of their daughter Joanna." He looked down, paused, and then continued with visible difficulty. "She died in an accident while exploring the abandoned tin mines with her sister Margaret. The roof collapsed. Only Margaret was saved. If there is anything to be said in consolation, she would have died instantly." I was mortified. Mrs. Polkinghorne returned with the tea, and James poured me a cup, squeezing my arm gently as he handed it to me. "Do try to drink it, Jack. I can see this has been a great shock." I accepted his kindness and explained my relationship with Joanna, how, though we had never met, I had felt a deep affinity for her, and how the news of her death was difficult to comprehend. "The family moved away soon after," he said. "I believe her father retired from the church and later passed away. I regret that I cannot tell you much more. I know too well what such a loss can mean. I myself lost my dear wife Imelda some years ago. At his insistence, he invited me to stay for a few days, suggesting that the company would do him good, and that it would allow me time to recover, and if I wished, to visit Joanna's grave in the nearby churchyard. I agreed, returned briefly to Penzance to collect my belongings, and found upon my return that he had prepared a spare bedroom, kept for visiting clergy, which suited me amply. I slept soundly that night, though at one point I dreamed of warm breath against my face, which woke me briefly. For a moment I was certain the air carried a faint trace of perfume. I dismissed the sensation as fatigue and soon drifted back into slumber. At 8 o'clock I was awakened by the quiet sounds of Mrs. Polkinghorne entering my room with breakfast. Tea, jam, toast, and a butter dish with its knife, neatly arranged upon a silver tray. "The vicar sends his compliments, sir," she said. "He will see you when you are ready in the lounge." After breakfast I washed and dressed, then joined James in the lounge, where he sat smoking a meerschaum pipe and reading the morning newspaper. He set the pipe down on a side table and said, "I hope, despite yesterday's tragic news, that you managed to sleep reasonably well." "I did, James, thank you, and I very much enjoyed the breakfast in bed." "As I mentioned, I don't receive many visitors," he replied. "It is the least I can do, old boy." He then asked whether I would care to visit Old St. Wilfrid's Cemetery, where Joanna was laid to rest, to pay my respects. I thanked him warmly for the suggestion, and together, in the gentle warmth of the July sunshine, we went out into his well-stocked garden, where I selected a small bouquet suitable for the occasion. After a 10-minute walk up the shoulder of the valley, we arrived at St. Wilfrid's, an early pre-Norman church hewn from native stone. Though modest in size, it possessed an impressive round tower which James explained had once served as a watchtower against historic raids. A low stone wall of great age enclosed the cemetery. The graves within stood huddled in uneven rows, their markers weather-stained and worn by centuries of wind and rain. Finding Joanna's resting place was a solemn moment. A carved limestone angel surmounted the grave, its arm outstretched as it released a bird from its hand, as if to signify that Joanna was freed from earthly restraint despite the brevity of her life. Although the day was warm, the air about the grave felt distinctly cold, deepening the quiet sadness of the visit. I laid the flowers carefully at the foot of the angel and stood in silence for a moment before bowing my head and turning away. For one fleeting instant, with the bright sun full in my eyes, I thought I saw a woman standing at the far side of the cemetery. When I raised my hand to shield the glare, there was no one there. No one, that is, but James and myself. I mentioned this to him, and he replied evenly, "There is little shade up here beyond the tower, and at times this barren place can play tricks on the eyes." He guided me toward the wooden lich gate, and we made our way back to the vicarage, passing once more through the stone cottages I had first seen on my arrival. I expected some sign of recognition or warmth from the villagers toward James, but instead observed only restrained nods and begrudging waves. The absence of smiles unsettled me. James seemed unsurprised. "The locals do not much care for outsiders," he said quietly. "Though they attend church each Sunday, few wish to speak with me. It is a close society and always has been, centuries old and slow to accept." Back at the vicarage, I spent the remainder of the day helping James in his walled garden, an oasis of colour set against an otherwise gaunt and forbidding landscape. As we worked, my thoughts slipped from the present and drifted back to a time when my young pen friend lived here with her family. I imagined the gaiety of the two sisters at play among these beds, their laughter at odds with the stillness that now prevailed. The contrast struck me sharply. Though the garden was lush and alive in the height of summer, I could not help but imagine it in winter, cold, grey and withdrawn, marked by long dark evenings and the uncertain glow of candles and oil lamps. For even now, in the year 1920, electricity had yet to reach this place and make itself known, although a telephone connection had been installed the previous year. That evening, James and I played chess while sharing a few glasses of excellent port, the bottles having been laid down by his predecessor. It was a most agreeable evening, during which James spoke at length of his earlier life in St. Ives, where he and his wife Imelda had both been born and raised. He was the son of a bishop, she the daughter of a wealthy landowner. They had no children, as Imelda had been frail from birth. She died tragically at the age of 35 and was buried there. As James spoke, the candle flames upon the table grew restless, flickering and wavering as though stirred by some unseen breath, as if they too had stories to tell. Neither of us remarked upon it, and we continued our game in companionable silence until 11 o'clock, when we wished one another good night and retired to our respective chambers. That night, although I slept soundly, I sensed a subtle change in the atmosphere. The air felt taut and expectant, as though braced for an event yet to unfold, but fatigue soon overcame me, and I slept until morning when breakfast called. Despite the pleasure of my host's company, I was aware that within a few days I must return to Penzance, and thence home by the GWR railway to London, where I had taken a small apartment. With this in mind, I resolved to explore the old tin mining district before my departure, mindful, of course, that many workings were little more than dangerous shafts, liable to collapse if approached incautiously. James, being of similar stature to myself, lent me a pair of stout walking boots together with a spare lamp and a length of climbing rope in case I should encounter difficulty. He voiced his concern at the idea of my going at all, but I explained that I felt compelled to do so, that I sought some measure of closure in my memory of Joanna. After Mrs. Polkinghorne prepared a luncheon pack for me, beef sandwiches and a bottle of porter, I set out across the bare, rocky terrain with a small rucksack. James had also lent me an Ordnance Survey map of the district, which I used to guide me toward the former mine workings, marked by a scattering of abandoned buildings now in ruins. While exploring the site, I noticed a woman in her early 20s moving among the rubble. She was dressed in knickerbocker trousers buttoned just below the knee and worn with thick stockings and sturdy lace-up boots. Above these she wore a light jacket over a white buttoned shirt, and she carried a long stick to steady her footing as she crossed the unstable ground. From her manner it was clear that she too was searching for something with quiet determination. She was some 30 feet away and appeared wholly unaware of my presence. I waved and called out to her, but she did not turn or acknowledge me. Curious and a little unsettled, I followed at a distance. For several minutes this continued. Despite the heat of the day, she neither paused nor rested. At last she stopped near the entrance to an old walk-in mine shaft. As I hurried after her, my foot slipped on loose stone, and I fell heavily. When I regained my feet and looked ahead, she had vanished. I assumed she had entered the mine. Moments later, as I approached the shaft, I heard voices echoing from within. Those of a man and a woman in a heated argument. There was something strange in their tone, an indistinct, hollow quality I could not readily explain. I set down my pack, took out the Tilly oil lamp, and lit it before venturing inside. As daylight receded behind me, I moved deeper into the shaft. Ahead I could see the man and woman standing together, their own lamps set upon the ground, casting long, wavering shadows. Not wishing to draw attention to myself, I extinguished my lamp and watched from the darkness. "I told you I loved you," the man cried, "and still you ignore my vows and would have nothing more to do with me." "You are a married man," the woman replied. "How could I ever be with one who belongs to another?" "She is gravely ill," he pleaded. "The doctors say she has but months to live. Only wait for me, and then we may be together." He reached for her, but she resisted fiercely, struggling to break free and flee back toward the daylight. In the struggle, he seized her by the hair and dragged her backwards. She stumbled, struck her head violently upon the rock, and fell. At that moment, the scene seemed to lose substance, as though thinning before my eyes. The man ran past me into the darkness, and as he did, I saw his face clearly. It was James's, yet younger, harder, and unfamiliar in its expression. Then there was silence. I relit my lamp. Where the shaft should have continued, there was only a wall of piled stone. Nothing lay beyond it. What I had witnessed was no living scene, but something preserved, an echo of a violent moment from the past, revealed to me alone. Shaken and with a growing sense of urgency, I turned back toward the daylight, resolved to return at once to the vicarage and confront the kindly James with what I had seen. When I returned, still shaken, an hour later, James was seated on a bench in the garden, enjoying the late afternoon sun. I could scarcely imagine a setting more tranquil, given what was now indelibly engraved upon my memory. A scene so shocking and deplorable that I felt compelled, as a matter of conscience, to confront him with what I had witnessed. I asked if I might sit beside him. He shifted along the bench without comment. As I turned toward him, he studied my face and at once perceived my distress. "Something dreadful happened earlier, James," I said. "Something I cannot explain away. It occurred in one of the old mine shafts, the one I believe from which Joanna was recovered." At the sound of her name, his expression altered, a flicker of alarm passing across it. He hesitated before speaking. "And how," he asked quietly, "did you arrive at that conclusion?" "I saw it," I replied, "not as one sees the present, but as a moment preserved. Joanna was arguing with a man. He seized her from behind. She fell and struck her head upon the rock." James said nothing. His face drained of colour and beads of perspiration gathered upon his brow. "You cannot be serious," he said at last, forcing a weak smile. "This is surely some misunderstanding." "It is no misunderstanding," I said, "and you know it." At that his composure gave way. He bowed his head and began to weep. "I never meant to harm her," he said brokenly. "She slipped, I swear it. I never laid hands upon her with that intention. You must believe me. God knows I loved her." "You did not call for help," I said. "You assumed she was dead." He covered his face with his hands. "There was blood," he whispered. "So much blood. I panicked. I knew what it would look like, what I would look like. I was a married man, a clergyman. I thought my life was finished." "And so," I said, "you caused the collapse." He did not deny it. "I believed she was gone," he said hoarsely. "I told myself it was already too late." I let a moment pass before speaking again. "There are two matters you must still answer, James. How did you, a man from St. Ives, come to know Joanna Simpkins? And what part, if any, did her sister Margaret play in what followed? He remained staring ahead, his hands clenched, the garden utterly silent around us. After a long while, he spoke. "I was a curate at St. Ives," he said. "I met the Simpkins family at a diocesan gathering when Joanna was 18. Her father was an agreeable man, proud of his parish, eager for company. I cultivated his friendship, at first innocently, I told myself. It gave me access to his household, to occasions where Joanna would be present." He swallowed. Imelda was no longer able to travel by then. She had been unwell for some time, as you know. In truth, her frailty made certain freedoms possible, freedoms I ought never to have taken. I said nothing. "I admired Joanna," he continued. "At first, that was all. Then admiration gave way to something else. She was young, earnest and trusting. In time, she confessed a feeling, and I, fool that I was, did not discourage it." He closed his eyes briefly. "I have already said more than I should. I came here after the Simpkins left the parish, partly from guilt and partly to put distance between myself and St. Ives. The villagers sensed that something was amiss. The Simpkins were well liked despite their suspicion of outsiders. After a pause, he said that he would do what honour demanded. He would resign his living and write fully to his bishop, setting down all that must be known. Beyond that, he said, the matter would rest with God. I understood then that I possessed no proof which would satisfy any earthly authority. There was nothing to place before a magistrate, only what I had seen and what he had chosen to tell me. I packed at first light and returned to Penzance the following day. 2 days later I left Penzance by train to return home. As I sat in the carriage, the gentleman opposite finished reading his newspaper and laid it aside. At my request, he passed it to me. On an inside page, I read that the vicar of Pulverin had been found dead in his churchyard the previous afternoon. According to the report, he had been crushed by the fall of a stone angel surmounting a grave, the dove it held having pierced his chest when the monument toppled. Engineers attributed the collapse to subsidence caused by abandoned tin workings beneath the cemetery, a rare occurrence, the article noted, that had never before resulted in loss of life. I folded the paper and returned it to its owner. As the train drew away from the station, I found myself thinking of the angel above Joanna's grave, and of the bird she released from her hand. I thought too of the mine shafts beneath the earth, sealed, forgotten, and yet never truly at rest. Some debts, it seems, are not forgiven, they are only collected. The end.